It's December 30th, 1916. We're at the Yusupov Palace in St. Petersburg, where a strange, cadaverous, almost corpse-like man is coming to dinner. This man, with long lank hair and deep sunken eyes, is none other than Grigory Yefimovich Rasputin. He's supposedly a holy man, a healer, a mystic, and he's a real pain in the rear end. His host, Prince Felix Yusupov, bids him to sit. Rasputin seems in good spirits. As the record player plays Yankee Doodle, he readily accepts the cakes offered to him. Cakes which are laced with cyanide. Yusupov begins to relax now. The murder plot is going swimmingly. But as an hour passes, then another, his relief turns to horror. Rasputin should be dead by now, but he's not. Yusupov's co-conspirators urge the prince to hold his nerve. Forget the poison, they say. Just shoot him. So Yusupov does as he's told, and shoots him. The strange figure hunches over and collapses to the floor, like Yusupov says, a broken doll. It's finally done. The room is silent, except for the nervous breathing of the co-conspirators. The nefarious monk, the holy charlatan, lies dead at their feet. But then the men recoil in horror as the bloody corpse begins to twitch and writhe, and then, in the prince's own words, his greenish and snake-like eye opens. As with all of our darker content, some sections have been censored to adhere to YouTube's guidelines, but an ad-free, fully uncensored version is available on our Patreon. It's hard to imagine Grigory Rasputin ever being young. He's so synonymous with the wild, scraggly beard, the craggy face, the mad, sunken eyes, so it's easy to forget that he was only 47 when he died, and it's even easier to forget that he was once a small child. Born in Pokrovskoy in Siberia in 1869, Grigory Rasputin had a tough upbringing. His father, Yefim, was both a farmer and an elder in the local church, which meant he instilled deep religiosity and a hard work ethic into his young family. We don't know much about Rasputin's early life, but we do know that he had at least 7, possibly 8 siblings. And we also know that by his teenage years he was known to be a bit of a drinker and a hellraiser. But other than these scant details, his youth is a mystery. This early anonymity suited Rasputin just fine. It allowed him to drift out of the mists of history like a cross between a saint and a spectre, and contributed to his eerie mythology. He married in 1887 when he was still only 18. His wife, Praskovya Dobrovina, bore Rasputin 7 children, 4 of whom died before reaching adulthood. But as the remaining children grew, it seems something was eating at Rasputin. He was still a young man with a growing family, but he felt the desire to leave it all behind. And this is where the historical view of the man begins to split. Some say it was religion that drove Rasputin away. He had a vision of the Virgin Mary, or of Simeon, patron saint of the Urals, and this vision sent him into a religious fervour. Others say he was simply on the run, fleeing his home in order to escape the charge of being a horse thief. And there's a lot of this in Rasputin's life, this kind of dichotomy between sacred and utterly profane, between the heavenly and the downright seedy. Whatever it was that originally drove him away from his home, by 1900 he'd completely reinvented himself. Now the familiar image of Rasputin begins to emerge. This is Rasputin the Stranik, or the Holy Wanderer. With a growing circle of devotees, Rasputin the Stranik began holding prayer meetings. To his followers, these meetings were profoundly spiritual experiences. Rasputin was like a kind of conduit to heaven. At least that's how he styled himself. To his detractors, however, the meetings were an abomination. Naysayers spoke of mass flagellation. They also spoke of group sessions and of female acolytes forced to bathe the naked Rasputin. Again, sacred, profane, heavenly, seedy. By 1905, Rasputin's fame had grown, and now he was creeping westwards. 1905 found him in Kazan on the Volga. Though he couldn't be more than about 36 years old at this point, he'd become known as a starets, a spiritual elder with a close proximity to the Almighty. It seems this starets act was convincing. It won him friends in high places. Leading bishops in Kazan recommended Rasputin to the High Alexander Nevsky Monastery, and soon Rasputin was heading west once again, this time to St. Petersburg. You might think that this was a step too far for Rasputin. His oddball, ragged shtick might have played well in the outskirts of Siberia, but not so much in the cosmopolitan centre of St. Petersburg. But you'd be surprised. In the first decade of the new century, St. Petersburg had become a hotbed of cultural and spiritual discourse, a place for new ideas that challenged the status quo. Think something like Paris in the 1920s or Greenwich Village in the 1960s, only with a lot more praying. The Petersburgian elite were craving new points of view and new experiences, including supernatural mysticism. To put it simply, Mr. Rasputin was quite the hit. He won many fans in high Petersburgian society, but it was two fans in particular who would set him on course for superstardom and disaster. These were the two sisters, Militsa and Anastasia Petrovich Niegosh. Militsa and Anastasia just happened to be the daughters of the King of Montenegro, and so they were already pretty influential. But even more importantly, they were betrothed to members of the Russian imperial family. Around the same time that Rasputin was making waves in St. Petersburg, a young boy was taking his first steps into the world at the nearby Peterhof Palace. This was Alexei Nikolaevich, the first son of the Tsar and Tsarina. After the births of 4 girls, the imperial throne finally had its male heir. Tsar Nicholas described the birth as a great and unforgettable day for us. There are no words to thank God enough for sending us this comfort in a time of sore trials. Young Alexei appeared to be robust. Perhaps he would follow in the footsteps of his grandfather, the 6'3" Alexander III. Or, even better, his great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, Peter I, who stood 6'8". As Nicholas's sister, Grand Duchess Xenia, said, Alexei is an amazingly hefty baby, with a chest like a barrel, and generally has the air of a warrior knight. But the joy was short-lived. After his umbilical cord was cut, the baby bled for hours, losing vast quantities of blood. The whole experience very nearly killed him, but the infant ultimately survived his ordeal. Throughout, though, the imperial family was devastated. It was clear that this was not a one-off incident. Young Alexei had hemophilia. His blood couldn't clot. A simple cut could cause the young fellow to bleed to death. Even a bruise could cause serious internal damage and be fatal. Alexei was essentially withdrawn from public life. The imperial family doted on him and did everything in their power to keep him safe and well. But deep down, there was the nagging knowledge that, in this condition, he wouldn't be an heir to the throne. He needed a saviour. Someone in tune with a power far greater than that of any earthly doctor or fallible surgeon. We now have 2 threads unfolding side by side. On one hand, we have the mad-eyed man stumbling in from the wild east, Siberia's rambunctious country bumpkin turned magical mystic who offers salvation and shagging in seemingly equal measure. And then on the other, we have the young Tsarevich, the emperor-in-waiting, the boy made from glass, for whom a scraped knee or a dead arm could be fatal. In the autumn of 1907, these 2 threads became inextricably entwined, spelling disaster for, well, just about everyone. Alexei was enjoying himself in Alexander Park near St. Petersburg that autumn when he took a tumble. This kind of thing happens to kids all the time, but for Alexei, of course, this was a crisis. His bruised leg became horribly distended. His aunt, Grand Duchess Olga, remembered. The poor child lay in such pain, dark patches under his eyes, and his little body all distorted, and the leg terribly swollen. The family were in utter despair. They had the best doctors in the land, but no one could help with their ailing son. The Tsarevich, still only 3 years old, was close to death. But then, a lifeline. Princess Anastasia of Montenegro had recently married the Tsar's cousin, and was now, well and truly, one of the family. She put the Tsar and Tsarina in touch with her new favourite faith healer and all-around mystic, Grigory Rasputin. Rasputin was the saviour when all seemed lost. He sat with the ailing boy, prayed over him, prayed with him, and told him, "Your pain is going away. You will soon be well. You must thank God for healing you, and now go to sleep." The next morning, a miracle. Alexei was alive and alert. He seemed to be cured. His leg even returned to its normal size. From then on, there was no question. For Tsarina Alexandra, Rasputin was the real deal. If they were going to keep their son and their dynasty alive, they needed him. It didn't take long for Rasputin to embed himself fully into the imperial family. For historian Pierre Gillard, at the beginning, the Tsar had tolerated Rasputin because he dared not weaken the Tsarina's faith in him, a faith which kept her alive. He did not like to send him away, for if Alexei Nikolaevich had died, in the eyes of the mother, the Tsar would have been the murderer of his own son. So Rasputin became a regular fixture at court. He acted as a sort of spiritual advisor and confidant for the family, but chiefly he was the healer for the Tsarevich, and perhaps the only person who could keep the boy alive. But according to Rasputin's detractors, it wasn't just Alexei he was attending to. It's difficult to think objectively about Rasputin these days. His closeness to the imperial family made him a massive target, and so plenty of rumours circulated about him. These rumours have become part of the freakish mythology around the real man. Many of these rumours are predictably sexual. It was said that Rasputin had seduced the Tsarina and was sleeping with her. This was a serious accusation, by the way. An extramarital affair would have been a scandal for the Tsarina, but she was at least a powerful woman in her late 30s, and so could have offered her consent. Far more disturbing were the rumours regarding the Tsarina's 4 daughters. Some of the exact details of this scandal have been left out of this video, but as I said, they are available on Patreon. Explicit cartoons began to circulate, showing Rasputin in Congress with Tsarina and, horrifically, with her 4 daughters. We don't know whether Nicholas actually believed these rumours, but he was revolted enough to banish Rasputin. Again, the Tsarina vetoed Nicholas's attempts to take control of the situation, and so Rasputin stayed. But for Rasputin's enemies, it wasn't just the accusations of misconduct that worried them, it was his hold over the imperial family. And in 1912, that hold strengthened. In October that year, Alexei was taken ill after a long, juddering carriage ride. The lurching of the carriage had ruptured a blood vessel, causing massive internal bleeding. It looked like this was going to be it, the innocuous wound that would finally kill the Tsarevich. He spent nearly 2 weeks in screaming agony, crying out, "Oh Lord, have mercy on me. Mama, help me." Finally, even the youngster himself seemed to have resigned to his fate, asking his parents, "When I'm dead, it won't hurt anymore, will it?" There was only one man who could help. Rasputin sent the Tsarina a telegram telling her not to worry. If she kept the doctors away from the boy, God would do his work. The following day, on October 10th, Alexei recovered. Rasputin had proved himself yet again. He was now an extension of the imperial family, and this meant his cards were marked. For Kianova Guseva, a peasant woman from Sizrun, Rasputin was a monster who had to die. In the summer of 1914, Rasputin visited the home of his wife and children in Protskovoye. When he emerged from the building, Guseva was waiting. She leapt at him with a knife, wounding him deeply in the stomach. As she did so, she yelled out, I have killed the Antichrist. Rasputin attempted to flee. Guseva then chased him through the village until finally the wounded Stranik struck her in the face with his staff. Guseva was arrested. Now it was Rasputin's turn to be in need. He'd just ordered the doctors to stay away from Alexei. Now, of course, he needed them. So, after some emergency surgery, Rasputin's condition stabilized. He would make a full recovery. Guseva was committed to an asylum. Needless to say, not everyone was overjoyed with Rasputin's recovery. One person who was certainly displeased was Duma member Vladimir Purishkevich. Purishkevich was an utterly charmless individual. As a staunch misogynist, he had referred to the First Women's Congress of 1908 as an assembly of. He was also a committed anti-Semite and believed basically everyone was under the control of the Jews, from the socialists and intelligentsia to the press and the councils of university professors. During the attempted revolution of 1905, Purishkevich had been a key member of the Black Hundreds, organising pogroms against Jews. One International Workers' Day, he gave a speech in the Duma with a red carnation stuffed down his trousers so that the bloom protruded from his fly. Purishkevich's antics were pretty unpleasant, but they endeared him to the Tsar. Like his father, Alexander III, Nicholas also distrusted Jews. He was known to read the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, a fraudulent work that claimed to expose the Jewish plot to take over the world, but was in fact a piece of anti-Semitic propaganda and conspiracy. He also hated socialists. This makes more sense than his anti-Semitism, as the socialists definitely did want the Tsar gone. Purishkevich evidently felt that his position was secure. This emboldened him to make some pretty inflammatory statements, not just about Rasputin, but also about Tsarina Alexandra herself. The Tsar's ministers, who have been turned into marionettes, whose threads have been taken firmly in hand by Rasputin and the Empress Alexandra. He is the evil genius of Russia, and she has remained a German on the Russian throne, an alien to the country and its people. Purishkevich may have been treading dangerous ground, but he wasn't alone. He had plenty of allies in his campaign against Rasputin. Perhaps the most valuable of them all was Prince Felix Yusupov. Yusupov had first met with Rasputin back in 1909 after he'd returned from his studies at University College, Oxford. He'd gone to the starets in search of spiritual nourishment. Rasputin had offered him something else, and had tried to seduce him. Yusupov was appalled by the man's advances, but he'd also witnessed his magnetism and manipulative nature in the flesh. He knew that Rasputin was a dangerous influence, and by the winter of 1916, he knew that he must be killed. Purishkevich and Yusupov, along with Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, began laying their trap. On the afternoon of December 30th, 1916, Rasputin boasted that he'd been invited to visit Yusupov's wife, Irina, that evening at midnight. Rasputin's allies sensed that something was up, and his remaining friends in the Duma warned him, "They'll kill you. Your enemies are bent on mischief." Rasputin paid no heed. He arrived at the Yusupov Palace at 11 p.m. and was greeted warmly by Prince Felix and informed that he was to wait in a basement room for Irina, who was not quite yet ready. In fact, Irina was not there at all. She was hundreds of miles away in Crimea. Rasputin had been lured on false pretenses. Down in the basement, the room was in disarray, and this was intentional. The conspirators wanted to make it look like a party had just taken place. On the table, Yusupov and his cronies had placed a collection of small cakes, each laced with cyanide. These were to be the tools of their assassination. Rasputin seemed calm. The gramophone played Yankee Doodle as he tucked into the cakes. If Yusupov was pleased to see Rasputin ingesting a lethal dose of cyanide, his joy didn't last long. Rasputin didn't falter. The poison had no effect. An hour went past, then another. Yusupov made his excuses and left the room. Upstairs, he spoke with Purishkevich and the other conspirators, who were by now quite drunk. He fretted about what to do. The others urged him to just stand firm, so he'd just have to shoot the mystic. By the time Yusupov returned, carrying a Browning pistol, Rasputin was starting to feel unwell. "My head is heaving, and I have a burning sensation in my stomach. Give me another glass of wine." Then Rasputin turned to admire a crystal crucifix displayed in the room. Yusupov seized his chance. "You'd best look at that crucifix and say a prayer." The shot from the Browning struck Rasputin in the stomach, tearing through his abdomen and liver and exiting out the back. Rasputin wailed in agony, but was still alive. The conspirators heard his screams and rushed drunkenly into the room. Rasputin gave a few more pitiful moans and then fell silent. The men sighed in relief. The job was done. But as they tried to catch their breath and discuss what to do next, Yusupov suddenly yelled out in horror. The corpse had begun to move. In the prince's words, his greenish and snake-like eye opened, the prince remembered. What transpired next was a ferocious struggle. Though weakened by poison and blood loss, Rasputin was now fighting for his life. Historian Simon Sebag Montefiore describes the scene. Foaming at the mouth, snarling furiously, and oozing blood, Rasputin sprang up and seized Yusupov, ripping off his epaulette. In Yusupov's own words, this devil who was dying of poison, who had a bullet in his heart, must have been raised from the dead by the powers of evil. There was something appalling in his diabolical refusal to die. Rasputin seems to have actually got the better hand of the prince. As he stumbled out into the snow-covered courtyard, the mystic yelled at Yusupov, "Felix, Felix, I'll tell the Tsarina everything." But Pureshkovich had now leapt into action. He gave chase, slipping on the snowy ground, and lurching drunkenly, he fired off 2 shots, both of which fizzed harmlessly away into the winter air. There was a 3rd shot, though, and this one didn't miss. It struck Rasputin in his back and tore into his kidney. The starets fell to the ground, but was still far from dead. Growing tired of what was becoming a bit of a farce, one of the party decided to end it once and for all. He strode up to the stricken Rasputin, placed a pistol between his eyes, and shot him point blank through the brain. He was, finally, dead. Now, Pureshkovich fell into a state of excitement. He kicked Rasputin's corpse in the head and shouted loudly, "I killed Grishka Rasputin, the enemy of Russia and the Tsar." Yusupov also seems to have descended into a strange, catatonic fury. He found a dumbbell from somewhere and began beating the body with it, before he himself fainted. After the violence, though, they began to recognise that they should probably at least try to cover their tracks. Someone found a stray dog and shot that, hoping that this would explain the gunshots and bloodstains. Rasputin's body was then thrown into the Little Neva River, and that was the end of him. Even in death, Rasputin is surrounded by a thick layer of mythology. Some accounts say it was hypothermia that ultimately killed Rasputin, not the gunshots. When his body was found, he'd been trying to claw his way out of the ice. There's no evidence for this. Yes, Rasputin was a bizarre character, and yes, he survived for far longer than he should have done after being poisoned and shot, but he wasn't magic. That bullet to the forehead killed him stone dead, just like it would any of us. Rasputin's funeral was then held on January the 2nd, 1917. Only the imperial family attended. Rasputin's own family weren't invited. The Tsar and Tsarina now fretted over who could keep their Alexei alive, but they didn't have to fret for long. By March 1917, revolution was underway. Nicholas abdicated the throne, and he and his family went into exile. The following summer, little Alexei, along with his parents and 4 sisters, would be led into a basement of their own, more than 1,000 miles away in Yekaterinburg. Here they would meet their own chaotic, bloody, and terrifying end, just like their beloved, troublesome Rasputin had 18 months before. But that is another story for another time.